Is the Russian economy gearing up for a 2008 style housing collapse? Just how close are Russian banks from falling apart due to terrible loans? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. All right, so this is an interesting series of stories from the Moscow Times, particularly around the Russian housing market. Now, this refers to past due and foreclosed auto loan and mortgage debt in Russia, which has doubled in the last 12 months or so as their economy starts to falter, right? And this is looking at, these are official Russian statistics, and you should take them with a grain of salt, right? This refers to the fact that delinquent housing loans are reaching almost 1.2 billion in the second quarter, a nearly doubling from the same period last year. Overdue loans climbed again by 85%, according to data from Russia's United Credit Bureau. And this is reported from pro-Kremlin daily news outlets. So again, the reality, I think, is going to be quite a bit grimmer. But the central bank has also confirmed this trend, saying that the 90-day overdue window is now 4% of all auto loans and about 1.1% of all mortgages. Right? They, of course, are like, well, we never should have loaned these people in the first place, blah, 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 saying that, oh, there was too many mortgages issued in 2023, 2024. I don't believe any of that, because the interest rates within Russia at this time were unbelievably risky. And again, while there was a lot of loans going out, they probably weren't mortgages and auto loans, right? They would have been actually the opposite. Instead of a loan to purchase a car, they probably would have been more likely to be a loan against a car or a loan against a house. But troublingly, by the end of May last year, these non-performing loans in at least retail, so non-business loans, were 5% or nearly 6% of Russian bank portfolios. And this is a problem because you know that these Russian banks count on the incomes from these loans in order to sustain their own operations and pay back the loans that they, in turn, are making to other companies. Because remember, large Russian operations and small Russian businesses go to banks and increasingly in an economic downturn and say, listen, we need some capital. We need a loan to float us until the economy picks back up. And banks can usually say, sure, we got you. We can give you a loan to sustain operations for 12 months, 18 months on the belief that your business will pick back up. The problem is the reason banks have that money is because there's a level of guarantee by the loans the banks currently have out. They say, of course we can afford to do that because every month, a million Russians send us their mortgage checks. And when they do that, that capital helps guarantee the capital we loan to you. The problem is that when the banks stop getting those checks, it becomes riskier to put money out into the world, meaning that fewer and fewer banks are going to get those loans, and the terms of those loans are going to be substantially worse, right? That's why they say the quality of debt service in the banking market has sharply worsened. This means that fewer and fewer people are paying off those loans. And when I say credit risk is accumulating, that's what I'm talking about. Because when you can't loan that business money, or you loan that business money and then they turn around and go, hey, I still can't pay it back. I'm still not making any sales. I'm not sustaining operations. Well, now the bank goes, now it's another problem. And then remember, that small business says, hey, I can't pay my bank loan, but I also can't pay my mortgage. So now the bank is getting hit on both sides. So it can be very quickly an exponential spiral of non-payments. But how much is this in kind of the overall aggregate of the country? Well, one, Putin has ordered its central bank to cut its key interest rate by about 2 percentage points in July, down to 18%, which is a pretty substantial drop. Again, that is, if it was 21%, now it's 18%. You're talking about a nearly 10% cut. So that is a real significant decline. As they point out, real interest rates on consumer loans can get over 30%, because obviously if 18% is what the bank is getting, and then they need to extend loan to a risky consumer, they're going to want that extra 30%. And of course, as we talk about, the vicious cycle. But here's the thing, for context, is this going to be like a 2008 style collapse for Russia? Well, I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because in August 2008, right? As the crisis was kind of brewing, all U.S. mortgages, and it was about 9% of all U.S. mortgages were either delinquent or in foreclosure. So beyond 90 days are facing foreclosure proceedings. Within 12 months, this amount had risen to 14%. So you can see this is the exponential spiral we're talking about, right? So it took, again, years to go from kind of a sustainable, let's see if we can find the chart here. So you can see here, right? 2006, you see some rises in 2007, and then from 08 to 09, right, the mortgage delinquencies became an absolute train wreck, right? So this is pretty key to understand. So the thinking is that Russia may be, again, it may be like here, right? These are prime rates. So you can see that you're looking right here about 1%. So this could be, we could be looking as late as a kind of like this could be as late as mid 2008 for Russia if we use this analog, which like you got to be suspicious because you're talking about different economies with different sets of rules around mortgages, right? The U.S. is unusual in that mortgage interest rates don't automatically adjust. There's a bunch of stuff like that. But essentially, one of the analysts said that a critical threshold is about 5% delinquency. So you would need to see a 5x increase in mortgage delinquency, which again, as we point out, really was able to go from 1 to 4% delinquency. That took place really over the course of like a year and a half. And it happened pretty exponentially, right? So the first 2 or 3% we saw from that chart happened over the course of like 2 years. But then the next 10% increase in delinquencies happened over the course of less than 12 months. So that's not the only economic woe facing Russia, right? Because as we talked about, internet blackouts, this is, of course, essential to Russia because Ukraine uses Russia's own telecommunications network to guide their drones to their targets, meaning that in order to stop Ukrainian drones or try to stop Ukrainian drones, the Russian government just routinely blacks out the internet. But again, if you're a business, that means you're going to conduct cash transactions if possible. And there's a bunch of problems with this. The first is that, well, there's not really any record of cash transactions necessarily. Now, banks are saying, listen, we know how much cash goes out, right? They said about $2.5 billion in cash has gone out in June and July alone. So, about $1.25 billion a month. And they're saying, yeah, this is starting to tick up. And they're like, well, it's probably because of these internet blackouts. But, from what we've heard, a lot of this is these internet blackouts, they don't happen necessarily during the day, right? Instead, what I actually think may be happening is a slow, gradual run on a bank. My thesis is because Russia, one, if you want to maintain a stable currency and you want to have like this continual level of state spending, you need to have some capital controls. You need to prevent the average person from getting their capital out of the bank and putting it into the economy. And so smart Russians, I think, are probably starting to see that. And as we point out, Russia knows they're going to have to impose capital controls because in June, the Russian financial watchdog of Russian Rosfin monitoring, brilliant, has been empowered to actually freeze bank cards and accounts for 10 to 30 days without court approval if suspicious activity is suspected. But given that this is Russia, this authorization to freeze bank cards is probably going to get used to not abuse suspicious activity, but simply to prevent Russians from pulling cash out of the economy, because it's essentially going to prevent a bank run. Banks, once Russian consumers begin to believe that these banks don't actually have their money in the bank, that they won't be able to get it out, there's going to be a run on the bank. People are going to want to hold their cash. And smart Russians that have been through other crises probably understand when they read this article that they knew what was going to happen, that this was the government preparing to ban Russians from withdrawing their funds. And once you do that, right, your funds, if your money is tied up for like 2 years, in the bank where you can't access it, is it really even your money? No, right? This is what happened in Lebanon 2-3 years ago. So I think this is actually, my thesis is that this is actually smart Russians saying, listen, we need to keep a lot more cash on hand, right? And there's, right, $2.3 billion came out, and cash holdings were actually declining. So I think that's a sign that literally, where are the rubles? I think they're under Russian consumers' mattresses, right? And boy, you read stories like this, right? Russia's VTB bank facing collapse in lending income as war pressures mount, right? So this is, again, income that they generate from loaning people money. So again, another surge in loan defaults. State-owned lenders' net interest income, right? Difference between earnings on loans and interest paid on deposits, plunged 49%. So literally, the difference between what they have to pay out their depositors and what they make coming in is narrowing like a lot and rapidly. Senior managers are signaling privately that official figures understate the severity of the problem, ding, 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 pointing to a loan portfolio in far worse condition than the public accounts suggest. The true scale, they said, is obscured by debt restructurings and opaque war-related lending. So this is, again, according to an earnings report, overdue retail loans rose by a third in 6 months to 5.2%. We just talked about this. But the real story is, again, that eventually Russians are going to get wise to the fact that the bank may not have their money. The money that the bank that they need to withdraw to pay for their groceries and to pay their rent, that is going to be tied up in the bank. That money is supposed to be being sent to them every month from loans, from mortgages, from businesses. And so the fact that VTB doesn't have it is itself a huge problem. Because why? Well, what happens if you're a Russian and you go to the bank and the bank says, actually, we can't allow you to withdraw money? Well, remember, some of those Russians are going to use it to repay their auto loans and their mortgages, meaning that a collapse is going to spread to another bank. And so, as we pointed out, right, this is a fundamental problem with your independent statistical agencies and your reporting becoming politicized and inaccurate. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? What it means is that the delusion that your economy labors under, if you could measure the delusion of an economy, the official statistics versus the real ones, the further that bifurcates, the harder the crash is going to be. It's kind of like, it's like being an alcoholic, right? So if or like a caffeine addict, right? Let's use a caffeine as an example. If I have one cup of coffee and then I don't drink a cup of coffee for a week, I'm fine. I have a real caffeine spike. I level out, right? And reality, and right, the stimulated Paul and the real Paul, like they don't differ that much. But what happens when you're like me today and I drink like 4 cups of coffee a day? Well, that means that stimulated Paul is way up here and baseline Paul's down here. And if I were to go cold turkey on caffeine, how bad would the crash be? It would be really bad, right? I would have headaches and nausea and tiredness, and I'd be grumpy and irritable, right? So this, you owe a debt to reality. At some point you go, damn, if I went without coffee, I would literally be in a lot of trouble. And so that is true of this economy, where the more you lie in official statistics, the further you disconnect from reality, the further that the Russian public, that other businesses and banks can prepare for the eventuality, right, of what's going to happen. Because the problem and advantage in sort of accurate statistics is that firms, individuals, if we see recession indicators in the official statistics and we believe them to be true, what do we do? What would you do if you saw a recession coming down the pipe? You'd hold more cash, right? You'd spend a little less, you'd hold more cash, you'd be better prepared. You might not, for example, quit your job to go to grad school. You might not take out a loan on a car. You might pause some consumption. Now, on the short term, that's bad. That actually helps bring about a recession. But in the long term, it also helps you recover from a recession. Again, think about it from a personal perspective, right? By not taking out that car loan, by not hoarding, by building up your cash. Yeah, maybe the economy gets tough for a while and you don't spend as much. But what you are able to do is pay your existing car loan with your savings. You're able to pay your mortgage, right? So your bank, remember that bank that's having kind of a tough time, it at least can count on your auto loan and your mortgage loan because you're paying it from your savings. Businesses work the same way. They say, listen, we're not going to open that brand new plant. We're going to save this cash to make sure we can pay our debts. And so what that means is that the recession happens, but because everyone is ready for it, it's smoother. It's like being at the beach. If you see a big wave coming, you're going to get hit with the wave, but you can kind of dive into it and sort of weave through it. But if you don't see the wave coming, someone blindfolds you or you're turning around, you can't see what's coming, you're going to get bowled over. It's going to be really dangerous. That is what we're seeing here, where the Russian consumer, the Russian firms, even the Russian banks are blind. Other than their own internal data that they literally will get in trouble if they release publicly, there's not really a way. Firms aren't going to be prepared. So that's one of the key differences here is that, as we point out in '08, some people were actually prepared, were hedged against this '08 style collapse. Goldman Sachs famously offloaded all of their bad mortgage debt before anyone else knew what was happening. Obviously, the whole movie, The Big Short, about the firms that called it. But imagine if it was illegal to call it. Imagine if a firm called it and then Putin's goons showed up and arrested him on fraud charges or something, right? Nobody would be trying to balance the risk in the system. And that, I think, is the huge danger here. And you can see 1 in 5 Russian building developers at risk of bankruptcy as their mortgage costs continue to soar. But wait, you may be asking yourself, this is from 2 days ago. I thought the rates were cut. Well, what that says is that there's a risk premium, right? There's a property developers, the banks say, listen, there is some kind of real risk premium here that's not accounted for in official statistics. Do you see how, again, there's this disconnect to the market's statement of risk, which says, hey, the risk level is like 30% if you're going to build a new building. Whereas the official Russian government says, oh, rates can be cut. Risks are low, right? You can see, again, the new production of the brilliant Russian Lada sedan pushed back amid parts shortages and supply chain strains. So again, is this going to be tomorrow? Are we going to wake up and see the Russian economy has collapsed? No, that's not how this works. But in the next 12 months, is the Russian economy going to get better? No. And the fact is that what you'll probably see is the Russian financial sector have to take increasingly draconian measures to prevent reality from happening. And ultimately, though, you cannot deny it. You cannot put your head in the sand forever, right? It's like any other disease. You know, you get told by your doctor you have diabetes early, you change your diet, right? You lose the weight, nothing happens. Or you can sit there and go, no, that doctor's wrong. Those doctors don't know bunk. I don't have diabetes. Well, you do. And eventually you're going to end up in the ER, getting an amputation. And that's the danger that the Russian government is running into, is that the longer they deny reality, the longer they force firms to deny reality, the harder it's going to be, right? And eventually they're not going to be able to fix their economy like in the US with reliable, straightforward economic data where firms can fix the economy and recessions get kind of evened out nice and smooth. This is going to be a massive, massive correction. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you taking the time. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one.